Chapter 14. Mr. Payne takes exception. To the north of Bear River in Digby County, across the Bay of Fundy, lies the bustling seaport of St. John. It proudly lays claim to being the first incorporated city in Canada, and in 1896, the Fundy city was home to more than 30,000 souls, each with a story to tell. Tasked with telling the darkest of those tales was Robert Payne, a married father of three who served as crime reporter for one of the city's most venerated news agencies, the Daily Sun. Payne, still spry at 51, boasted an impressive array of war wounds and battle scars, each bearing witness to his 2 decades on the police beat. Unlike his journalistic contemporaries, Payne focused exclusively on crime, having covered all the biggest murder cases in New Brunswick and beyond. Although he was never afforded his own byline, Payne's distinctive prose and conversational writing style were easily recognizable and much admired by his growing legion of readers. So great was Payne's reputation that, when he docked in Digby mere hours after Annie's body was discovered, his competitors breathlessly reported his arrival. If Robert Payne was sent to cover the story, the murder of Annie Kempton was indeed big news. Had they known the contrary tone his coverage would take, however, they might have held back the welcome wagon. Kowtowing to his contemporaries was not Payne's forte. He infiltrated a traumatized community with dispatch if not always discretion, reporting with rhetoric hitherto unheard of in the staid world of Victorian journalism. Naturally inquisitive and doggedly determined, Robert Payne was a pioneer of the investigative method. He landed the interviews no other reporters could and never shied away from asking the tough questions. He strove for accuracy, often at the expense of the sensationalism so favored by his vocational lessers, delivering journalism bereft of maudlin sympathy. He was more interested in getting the story right than getting it first or drenching the facts in purple prose. His lean, pared-down style was very much the template for the best of today's crime reporting. On January 28, Robert Payne hit the dock running and soon left his competitors listing in his wake. He secured a number of exclusives in quick succession. The first was a walkthrough of the crime scene, during which Payne took the liberty of reading a private letter sent by Mary Kempton to the victim just days before her death. Such a gross invasion of privacy violated all professional ethics, not to mention all sense of human decency, yet it was exactly the level of intimate detail the Daily Sun's readers had come to expect from Mr. Payne. A second coup came in the form of an impromptu interview with the victim's older sister, Mrs. Jessie Rice. Unlike her gangly sibling, the eldest Kempton daughter entered womanhood with a coltish grace that had long since matured into a quiet poise. Whether by luck or design, the reporter found himself traveling aboard the same train as the bereaved sister. Mrs. Rice spoke tearfully of Annie's lifelong ambition to be a music teacher and shared other family secrets. It remains an open question whether Payne identified himself as a reporter at any point during their conversation. The most envied of Payne's exclusives was his interview with the accused. The first and only of his kind to have actually met and spoken with Wheeler, Payne soon found himself at odds with his brethren in the Fourth Estate and running counter to the feeling of the community at large. After spending some time with Wheeler, Payne believed him to be an innocent man, wrongly accused and sorely done by. Payne first encountered Wheeler at the Kempton home, where Annie's remains served as a chilling backdrop. He wrote, "In conversation with your reporter today, and within 2 feet from the corpse, Wheeler wished to know when he could go home, never expecting to be arrested." Payne's conviction that Wheeler was being railroaded grew even stronger as he sat through Wheeler's testimony at the coroner's inquest. His evidence was given in a straightforward way and he showed no signs of being the guilty person. He traced his actions, on the night in question, in a concise and thorough manner. If guilty, he shows an innocent countenance. Robert Payne continued his contrarian stance, even as public resentment grew, and steadfastly proclaimed Wheeler's innocence in the face of overwhelming opposition. Following yet another exclusive interview with the accused, Payne noted, "Wheeler, if guilty, shows wonderful power of control over himself, and to all appearances seems as much interested in the capture of the murderer as do the citizens." Payne's unique take on the case also extended to the victim, and his no-holds-barred approach rubbed many the wrong way. The Sun reporter, who once ungenerously and erroneously described Annie as 15 years of age but large and would weigh 140 pounds, did not share the popular perception of Annie as a defenseless maiden. Wheeler seconded the notion, recounting a prior wrestling match between Annie and him. Wheeler mentioned about he had once in fun with the deceased and knows her strength. The story did little to curry public favor, but it did succeed in countering a commonly held misconception that a girl of Annie Kempton's station in life would not associate with a waif, a nobody like Peter Wheeler. Aside from the wrestling misstep, Payne did all he could to portray Wheeler in the best and most sympathetic light. Peter acknowledged the untenable position he found himself in, saying, he would give all he had he not been the first to have found her and, friend as he was, he feels the strains of knowing the community believe him guilty. The Daily Sun was also the only paper to give voice to Wheeler's version of events and was the lone tabloid to print in full his statement to the coroner. Wheeler emphatically stated that just after 2 o'clock on the night Annie was killed, he had seen 3 men, all staggering and clearly intoxicated, on the road that led to the Kemptons. Wheeler was able to give a detailed description of the men, but neither the local constabulary nor Detective Power had given the matter the slightest attention. Payne pleaded Wheeler's case, writing, "The authorities, before it is too late, should see whether this part of the story is true." While other regional tabloids opted not to dispatch a correspondent to the scene and pillaged freely from the reportage of others, the Daily Sun saw the value of putting Payne on the ground. Some features of the case, argued Payne, that seem mysterious to people at a distance are as plain as a pikestaff to those who live on the spot. Payne did not simply scoop the competition with his exclusives, he had his finger on the pulse of the community. When it came to the citizens of Bear River, Payne limned an accurate if somewhat unflattering portrait, telling his readers that the villagers kept to a great extent within themselves and, with them, it is Bear River first, last and all the time. The St. John-based reporter found the community tight-knit, with a well-established grapevine, what one knows, the other knows. In a village with tall fences but no boundaries, there was no hiding the wellspring of hatred toward Wheeler. The local witnesses felt so strongly that they could not conceal their hostility to the accused during the inquest. Payne did the math: a community of like mind, coupled with a media-driven misinformation campaign, created a terrible equation. Payne had felt the tide turn against Wheeler from day one. The feeling of the townsfolk is strongly against the accused, and if he should be tried for the crime here in the present temper of the people, he would undoubtedly be convicted of the murder of Annie Kempton. There was no question in Payne's mind that only a circumstantial case existed against Wheeler, with evidence certainly by no means strong enough to secure his conviction, given there is no positive testimony that he is the slayer of the unfortunate girl. Yet, in spite of the case's crumbling foundations, Payne was equally certain that Wheeler was already a dead man. The conviction is firmly settled in the minds of the whole neighborhood that Peter Wheeler is the murderer of Annie Kempton. Indeed, so strongly are some people's impressions with the prisoner's guilt that their feelings have so overcome their better judgment that they desire to see summary punishment inflicted. In a last-ditch effort at damage control, Payne tried to harness the power of the mob, hoping to use its fringes to sway the center. He knocked on every door in Bear River and found tiny pockets of resistance willing to throw a few kind words Wheeler's way. Payne implored his readers to ignore the epithets shouted by the masses, reminding them that those who know Wheeler intimately give him a good name, and that Peter has always been a sober, industrious fellow. When the last of the village rebels had said their piece, Payne decided to tap the mother lode. He clung to the words of Wheeler's last remaining friend, Tilly Camo, although she was no longer considered an unbiased source, who swore at the inquest that Wheeler never drank, caroused or kept bad company. Payne's efforts incited outrage in the community. Bear Riverites, thinking little of Tilly herself, thought even less of her full-throated defense of her ersatz husband. Bear River was clearly a village divided by more than a county line. By the time Payne arrived, those who hated Wheeler vastly outnumbered the few still willing to sing his praises. Payne also learned that the villagers' polemic stance on Wheeler was not of recent origin. From the day his ship had docked in Bear River, Wheeler was a marked man, a dark cloud on the region's snowy white landscape. Adding another notch to his tote board of exclusives, Payne was the first to report there had been bad blood between Wheeler and his neighbors long before the murder of Annie Kempton. According to Peter, he had survived 2 prior assaults, attacks that had left him bloodied and beaten. To add insult to serious injury, the men who inflicted the beatings lived within spitting distance of Wheeler's rented room. Wheeler never knew the impetus for the animosity but suspected it had racial origins. Even among his staunchest supporters, Wheeler's race was an issue. Like his contemporaries, Payne could not resist speculating on Wheeler's ethnicity. It is said here that he is a Portuguese or a Spaniard, Payne told his readers, yet he found Peter to be a study. Although people here fail to grasp that he is not of their phlegmatic race, but has warm southern blood coursing through his veins, he is the product of a warm clime, Cuba some say. The press were not the only ones playing the race card when it came to Wheeler. Robert Payne could not help but notice that Detective Nicholas Power seemed inordinately preoccupied with Wheeler's ancestry, sprinkling countless allusions to Wheeler's dark roots throughout his many interviews with the media. Detective Power says Wheeler's lips took on several colors during the development of the evidence against him, noted Payne in one report, adding sardonically that the Halifax detective is a keen observer. Whatever Wheeler's ambiguous lineage, Payne assured his readers that this was an intelligent, well-schooled man. The prisoner reads Latin as well as English and talks French fluently, the St. John Daily Sun proclaimed, adding that in conversation he uses good language, much better than the average villager, and some of his expressions indicate an acquaintance with books not read by the masses. The most any Nova Scotian paper offered was the begrudging double negative, "Wheeler is not an uneducated man." Once in custody, Wheeler applied his formidable intellectual prowess to the case against him. In speaking with reporters, Detective Power had made much of two tiny blood spots reportedly found on Wheeler's pants and sock. Wheeler offered a reasonable explanation for the stains during his first police interrogation, saying they stemmed from his hunting expedition on the afternoon before Annie died. Although the detective paid no heed to Wheeler's statement, Payne and the prisoner discussed the matter at length. The reporter informed Wheeler that Power had sent the clothing to Mr. McIntyre, a blood analyst with the Halifax Police Department. Wheeler asked Payne whether McIntyre was a competent man, expressing legitimate concerns that forensic science was very much in its infancy. Wheeler's scientific acumen impressed Payne almost as much as his linguistic acuity, further endearing the prisoner to the jaded newsman's leathery heart. Payne's admiration for Wheeler extended beyond their shared love of language. The reporter clearly respected Wheeler's character, noting, "He stood the inquest like a Spartan, and though he must have known the thoughts of many, he never flinched. If ever any man carried himself with composure, it was Wheeler. He spoke in feeling terms of Annie, and his heart seemed touched like all the rest." It was all to no avail. Try as Payne might to capture Wheeler in a matter that was more accurate and amenable than the image painted by his contemporaries, the reporter knew it was a losing battle. Wheeler's appearance actually will not have the effect of eliciting sympathy on his behalf. He bears no evidence of refinement. It was, however, a problem with an obvious solution, at least to Payne's way of thinking. Refinement is in the eye of the beholder. So, too, is race, particularly if the beholding eye belongs to an agreeable newspaper artist. After more than a week of extolling Wheeler's many virtues into a vacuum, a single picture did what thousands of Mr. Payne's well-chosen words could not: make the swarthy Wheeler palatable to the masses. The St. John Daily Sun put its own twist on the Goldilocks fable when it printed a picture of Peter Wheeler on the front page of its February 8 edition. If the Nova Scotian papers could portray Wheeler as too black, his kinder, gentler neighbor to the north opted to render him as too white, depicting the accused man as nothing short of a proper British dandy.